Now on BBC World News, Global Questions travels to Kiev, where Zeinab Badawi and her panel of politicians and experts will take questions from a local audience to discuss the Russia and Ukraine crisis.
Hello, welcome to Global Questions with me, Zeinab Badawi from Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. The government here has been monitoring the intense talks between Russia and the West very anxiously. Have the negotiations this week diffused the tensions on the Ukraine-Russia border, where Moscow has been amassing troops? Or is it the start of a new Cold War? Welcome to the Mistetsky Arsenal Cultural Centre here in Kiev. Let me tell you who's on my panel who'll be taking questions from the audience here. Question now from Olexander Petrulenko.
Hello. When the international community shake hands with the Kremlin, is it immoral and dangerous?
Is it immoral and dangerous to shake hands with the Kremlin? Kristina, should you be having a dialogue? Because, I mean, look, the Russians are saying America is our principal negotiating partner. That's what these talks have been about. Should you talk to them?
I think absolutely we should talk to them. That's what we've been doing the past week in the 3 different fora where we've had talks. The only way that we can come to an agreement and address the concerns that Russia says it has is to talk about it. We think that's in fact the appropriate way to do it, and we hope that we can continue the dialogue and have a discussion about the concerns and come to some sort of agreement rather than turn to aggression and no talking.
Deputy Prime Minister, I mean, you have been involved in the talks Ukraine has at the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, because you're members of that, as is Russia, for example. I mean, do you think it's right that you should be in these dialogue forums when you say that they've invaded Ukraine and putting a gun to your head?
First of all, was the cross-cutting line Ukraine and all the Western leaders were pushing for is that there's no other but diplomatic scenario in any discussions related to the peaceful settlement in Donbass and de-escalation. So using these platforms was a good format to refresh ourselves, and to bring back not only to Ukrainian, but the common Western understanding what Russia is.
You mentioned the Donbass region there in the east of
Yes.
Ukraine, where you have these 2 breakaway statelets, Luhansk and Donetsk, by pro-Russia separatists. Okay,
we deal with Russian aggression on a daily basis, and since the first day when the annexation of Crimea started and until now, there's no difference for us because we're struggling it on a daily basis. But I think these
I should just remind everybody, of course, 2014 Crimea annexed
in
by
2014,
Russia.
yes, part of Ukrainian territory was annexed, and on the other part of the Ukrainian territory, we have the ongoing war with the Russian military troops permanently present. For all of these 8 years, the dialogue was the same. But I think it's a good refreshment for the Western leaders to see how the dialogue with Russia looks like. And Ukrainians never had any high expectations from this dialogue on each and every platform. But what we are proud of is that we see the real transatlantic unity and the real red lines which are there. First of all, Russia will not put ultimatums and dictate whether there should be or should not be enlargement of NATO. There should not be another revision of the security architecture. And it's really important that we have already used the instruments of talk. Now we should use the instruments of actions against Russia.
Let's go to Sergey.
Well, I would tend to agree with what just has been said about the need to continue dialogue under all circumstances. Russia is a major regional player, you would argue, global player. No question can be solved without Russia. Russia has done some nasty things on the global stage. There's no doubt about that. It's not the only country that has ever done nasty things on the global stage, but still dialogue is important because the stakes are too high.
Bildt.
It could be, depends on the circumstances. I mean, of course, there must always be room for diplomacy. I was foreign minister, I think, for 8 years. And apart from the close circle of EU friends, there was no one I spent as much time with as with the Russian foreign minister on all sorts of issues. Sometimes we did agree, Often we disagreed, but it was important to keep the communication channels open. Then certain occasions, Crimea, Ukraine aggression, we imposed sanctions on Russia. But even more important, I think, we stress the importance of building up the democratic resilience of our respective societies. That is the biggest deterrence to aggression. That you have the democratic support of the respective countries, be that Ukraine or be that whatever other country it could be. Diplomacy, absolutely essential.
Diplomacy, absolutely. But we've heard also from the Americans in particular a range of financial, political and economic sanctions which could be implemented if you don't make progress on the talks. So a point on that then, Carl Bildt, and then you, Kristina.
That's not something we want. I think I can speak for
Who's we then? The Europeans?
Yeah, I was going to say that. We Europeans.
Because you need Russian gas, don't you? That's the reason why you don't want the sanctions.
We might need Russian gas. We want to have trade, a friendly relationship with Russia. Russia is a European nation. We want to live in peace and harmony. That sounds rather idealistic at this particular time. With Russia. We spend a lot of time building cooperation with civil society, economic links. We don't want to have a conflict with Russia, period. But when Russia acts in a way that is detriment or against the basic securities of European order, or denying European nations, democratic nations, their right to choose their own destiny, then we have to react with sanctions. We don't want it, but we need to do it.
But do you think Europe will really accept the sanctions when Europe depends on about 30% of its gas needs on Russia? Some countries in Europe, 100%.
True. There's a price to be paid, but we are even more dependent.
Hang on. You're just saying that's a price that has to be paid. Do you think democratically elected governments are going to see the lights and the heating go down in their countries?
I think so, because we are even more dependent upon peace in Europe. And peace in Europe is dependent upon respecting the right of each and individual nations. That is something that we are far more dependent on, peace, than gas.
Kristina, I mean, on this issue of sanctions, yes, carry on talking, you're all saying, but you've got to have a threat of or else. And the sanctions path, I mean, do you see unity between Washington, which isn't dependent on Russian gas, with the Europeans on this?
Yes, we've actually seen very good unity. First of all, in NATO, all 30 members together on Wednesday said the same thing. That is that they are not going to give up Ukraine's choice to join the alliance despite Russian demands. And on the sanctions part, yes. I mean, Russia has two paths. It can take the path of discussion, dialogue, and trying to address some of its security concerns, which is what we've been trying to do the past week, or it can take aggressive action. If it takes aggressive action, make no mistake about it, it can expect very severe consequences, not just financial and economic consequences from the United States, from Europe, and by the way, from the G7, which have some other members that are not part of Europe or the United States. It's a global approach. But they'll also get some things they don't want. If they go into Ukraine, then we have already said that we're going to have to reinforce our eastern flank of NATO. They say they don't want NATO forces closer to their border. Well, then don't go into Ukraine, because that's what it'll end up doing. So I do think that they have to think twice about what they're going to do, because they will face very severe consequences in several areas.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you to my panel. Thank you to my audience here and those of you who posed questions. So we've been discussing, is this possibly the start of a new Cold War? And you've heard what the panel here say. They're actually more worried about a hot war. That's all from this edition of Global Questions from the Arsenal in Kiev. Until the next time, from me, Zeinab Badawi, and the rest of the Global Questions team, goodbye.